Okay, here we are, chapter 5, the last chapter in this part of the class. We're talking about consumer buying behavior and business buying behavior just a little bit. So I'm going to post an article, or I have posted an article on Blackboard about neuromarketing. And essentially what that is about, there's a study that someone's doing at Buffalo State College about the difference between what people say they want in terms of research, which we talked about in chapter 4, and what people actually then end up buying. So the question is, what's the disconnect between those two? Why is it that people say they want one thing, but then when they actually get to the store, they end up buying something else? Let me move this over just a little bit. Okay. All right, so here we go. Consumer buying behavior, it's buying behavior of final consumers. That's people like you and me who buy things to use at home, essentially, for their own personal consumption. All right, so again, these are just some more terms. Consumer buying behavior is buying behavior of final consumers, and consumer markets are individuals and households that buy things. So those are just terms. There's the buying behavior, and then there's the consumer market. All right, the one thing we talk about a lot is this whole idea of the buyer's black box, which you see in the middle of this, and that's what goes on in our head. What is it that goes on in people's heads and hearts to a certain extent when they're making a decision? So there's this chart, super duper important chart. There's 4 general categories of factors that influence consumer buying behavior: cultural, social, personal, and psychological. I'm going to go through each one by one. So first up is cultural. So culture, we're all part of a culture. It's usually, generally speaking, a national culture. In the United States, we have a culture that believes in achievement and hard work and getting ahead and all that kind of thing. And they're essentially, we learn them from people around us. What are our basic set of values? Here we value freedom of press and religion, speech, and all that kind of thing. Then there's subculture. Everyone is part of some kind of subculture. It's based on some sort of common experience. It can be based on gender, it can be based on age, it can be based on geography, it can be based on special interests. There could be a surfing subculture or a motorcycle subculture, a music subculture, Catholic subculture, that kind of thing. It's based on some kind of common life experiences. So that's also influencing, because we're all part of a larger culture, but then there's these subcultures that we're part of, and we can be a part of many subcultures. And then social class is this idea of the relatively permanent and ordered divisions of society. Culture, a lot of times, social class, a lot of times people think social class is just based on income. But it's based on really a variety of different things. It's based on income. It's based on wealth. Wealth is your net worth. Just because you have a high income doesn't mean you have a high net worth. And just because you have a low income doesn't mean you have just because you have a high income, it doesn't mean you have a high net worth. Just because you have a low income, it doesn't mean you have a low net worth. So there is also this idea with wealth, with generational wealth, money that's been passed down. Occupation also plays a role in it. There are some in our society, occupations that are held in higher esteem than other occupations. Physicians and attorneys, for example, have higher esteem than, say, plumbers and carpenters. Again, it doesn't necessarily influence income. It's just an issue of how people view you. So, and the fourth is education. Your education level definitely determines social class. Okay, and then the second one is social factors. We'll talk about those. Groups and social networks. Essentially, there's membership groups that you're a part of, and then there's reference groups that are similar to you that, you're in a membership group of students, and reference groups would be maybe other students, other schools. And then aspirational groups are groups that you aspire to be a part of. So maybe it's a specific job or career you want to go into, or when you're in your career, Maybe you want to be like the boss. So you might buy things that are that are- that the other people in your aspirational group have. Okay, word of mouth is very important. It's this idea that you get referrals about things from your friends and your relatives and your coworkers and that kind of thing. An opinion leader is someone because of some sort of special character, specialized knowledge, or also special characteristics, likability. People listen to you. So it could be, if you play sports and you're looking for, the best shoe to wear, you might ask one of the best players on your team, or you might ask your coach. That could be considered an opinion leader. Opinion leaders can also be in the public eye. People who spokespeople for certain products. Jennifer Aniston, for example, is a spokesperson for beauty care products, or you might look at at one time. Tiger Woods was a spokesperson for golf equipment. Um, someone who's in cooking might look to someone like Rachel Ray or Anthony Bourdain, something like that. Okay, family is the most important consumer buying group. There's no doubt about that. Um, uh, that what you're interested in, really, all those things are plugged in pretty early in life. By the time you're 5, your personality is pretty much set and preferences are set and that kind of thing, and it influences what eventually people buy. And then roles and status. That's um, the what people are expected to behave like based on the social group around them. So, if you're people are held to different standards. Mothers are supposed to behave a certain way. Fathers are supposed to behave a certain way. Physicians are supposed to behave a certain way. Teachers are supposed to behave a certain way. It's how you're, and that's also going to influence what you buy. That's social factors. Next are personal factors. Age and life cycle stage. Age and life cycle, it's basically where you are in your life at the time. So, for example, generally the life cycle stages are education, marriage, children, retirement. Those would be some life cycles. But what you want to be careful about is that a 30-year-old male who lives in New York City, who has children, might spend their money or buy things differently than a 30-year-old male who lives in Los Angeles who doesn't have children. So they might fall into the same demographics, but because of where they are in their life cycle, they would perhaps buy things differently. Occupation affects goods and services bought. There's a general, these are generalizations, but people who are in blue collar jobs tend to buy, they go after people who have blue collar jobs buy more quote unquote rugged material, boots, sturdier coats, that kind of thing. Whereas people who are in professional or white collar jobs might buy different types of clothing, or might drive a different kind of car, or might live in a different kind of neighborhood, that kind of thing. Might go to vacation in different places. An economic situation. Remember at the beginning of the semester we talked about the difference between a need, a want, and demand. And need is a state of felt deprivation. Want is the shape that needs take based on personality and culture. And then demand are wants backed by buying power. So how much money you have is going to influence what you buy. All right, and then there's lifestyle. Lifestyle is this basically how you spend your time and what your opinions are. So, some people might be very outdoorsy. You might spend their weekends hiking and camping and canoeing and skiing and whatever. Or some people might spend their weekends hanging out with their kids and going to soccer games or going to football games, the Little League game, or taking them to the park. Some people might spend their weekends cooking. Some people might spend their weekends, going to plays and listening to music, that kind of thing. So that's lifestyle. And then personality and self-concept, how we view ourselves. Some people view themselves as someone who's going to buy some people might view themselves as someone who would be comfortable driving a sports car. Some people might view themselves as someone who would never think about driving a sports car, and they think of themselves as more of a pickup truck person or a sedan person or something like that. So what your personality is, how you view yourself, is also going to influence. Okay, and then finally, in that chart, are psychological factors. So motivation, why is it that you're buying the product? What's motivating you to buy the product? Perception, how do you perceive certain brands and certain types of products? So, for example, General Motors had all those problems a couple years ago with their ignition control, with the cars were starting on fire. And so people might have a poor perception of of GM. I'm sorry. People might have a poor perception of Volkswagen because they had those problems with the emissions control. They might not trust them anymore. People might have a perception about goods that are made in foreign countries. You might have a perception about certain stores. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can be influenced by perception, but it's how we order things. Stereotypes play a role in perception. Um, this idea of projection, assuming that everybody feels the same way you do. There's a couple of different things that influence perception, but it's how we order things, how we make sense of things. Okay, so continuing on with psychological factors, learning. It's based on your behavior from maybe using the product before. Did you have a good experience with that product or a bad experience with the product? Beliefs and attitudes based on a favorable or unfavorable attitude towards a product or a brand. Beliefs and attitudes are formed by direct experience, actually using the product. Also can be based on social learning. Social learning is this idea that you learn things from other people. Okay. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know a lot of people see this in other classes. We talk about it in management. We talk about it in organizational behavior, which is a class that I teach. And so it's used in management. It's also used in marketing. The idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that you can't move to the next level until the previous level has been satisfied. So physiological needs are things like food, water, air. Safety needs are feeling safe in your atmosphere, feeling safe in your home or your workplace. Social needs, just kind of feeling that you're part of a larger group, that you can receive love. Esteem needs are how you feel about yourself, recognition, status, and then self-actualization is this idea that reaching your highest level of yourself, finding out what it is that you are best at, and being able to use that, and being completely fulfilled. So marketers prey on these very much. The safety needs, the one prime example of that is you see these ads for home security systems where the father is going away on a business trip and the mother is home alone, and they're concerned because the neighbors got broken into. They're preying on your need for safety. Social needs, you'll see, if you chew a certain kind of gum, then you'll get lots of dates, that kind of thing. So that's really the basic of what that's the things that are going on inside that black box. These things, the cultural, social, personal, and psychological influences, and then also in the background, always thinking about this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That, as I said, you'll hear about in psychology class, management class, marketing class. We talk about it also in organizational behavior. Okay, buyer decision process. This slide and the next slide are very similar to each other. They're just written out in different ways. We recognize that we have a need. Oh, actually, I take that back. There's not another slide like this. That's my mistake. First you recognize that you have a need. You're hungry, you're thirsty, you need a new winter coat, you need new skis, you need a new backpack, you need a new car. And then this idea is that you gather information about what you're looking for, and that could come through the word of mouth. It could come through personal referrals, that kind of thing. You evaluate the alternatives, you make a decision, and there's post-purchase behavior, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Post-purchase behavior is either people are satisfied or unsatisfied after they buy the product. Having customer satisfaction is really important to building the relationship because it builds trust. There's this idea of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive means thinking, how you think. Cognition is thinking, and cognitive is thinking, and dissonance is like a break, or what you is a break. So with cognitive dissonance, there's a break in your thinking. So essentially, it's some kind of conflict that you're unhappy with your purchase. Ugh, I wish I had gotten that car. I don't know if I like the color. Or the washing machine, I don't know. Now that we have it, I'm not so sure. I'm reading something else about it. So that it's not a good product. So some people, there are ways to ground that for sellers. One is to offer return policies or or warranties or something like that, or follow up behavior, follow up with the salespeople, with checking if you like it and that kind of thing. But purchase behavior, if you want people to be happy after you buy your product, because if they're not happy, then they might feel a little bit hesitant to buy it again. Okay, let's talk about the adoption process. The adoption process is when people, this idea of being aware of a product. You could become aware of a product, the years ago when the iPod first came out, or an iPad first came out, when the tablets first came out. People become aware of it. They develop some sort of interest in it. They may evaluate it, they try it out, and then they buy it. So this is different for every person. Every person goes through a different process. Everybody reacts to it differently, because this is the adoption process, but there are different adopter categories, which we will talk about right now. So adopter categories are innovators, early adopters, mainstream, late mainstream, laggards, or lagging adopters. There's an ad actually for Buick that you may have seen. There's a young woman who says, "I'm an early adopter," and it's the people who are first to buy it. So, first to buy a product. They're people who feel comfortable. They're people who feel comfortable, are maybe willing to take a chance on something when a new product line comes out. The first people, for example, to buy hybrid cars. The first people to get some sort of electronic equipment. Those are early adopters. And then eventually we move into people who are perhaps more hesitant. Either they're more hesitant or they don't have as much need for the product. So the key for a marketer is to find out who those innovators and early adopters are, and work with them to try to convince the early mainstream, late mainstream to eventually buy it. So what influences a rate of adoption of a product? One is the relative advantage. Is it that much better than the other products that are out there? Is it compatible to your lifestyle, and is it compatible to other products as well? Is it complexity? Is it easy to understand? Divisibility in terms of can you try the product out? Is it something that can you test drive it? Can you see a demonstration, that kind of thing? And communicability, is it easy to explain? Okay, so that wraps up consumer buying. Now we're going to talk really briefly about business buying. Essentially, it's a little bit different, because when you buy something if an individual buys something at home, they usually make the decision themselves, or perhaps with their spouse or their children or their partner. Whereas business buying is a little bit different, because it's a process. You usually buy in bigger quantities and that kind of thing. There's perhaps more people to choose from, or less people to choose from, depending. So they involve more money than consumer markets too. There's a whole different demand structure for them. It's a little bit slower. The buying unit I just mentioned, talking about, there's usually a committee that makes that decision, and there's different types of decisions in terms of it, because it's much more financially focused, long-term focused, and you might have long-term relationships with some suppliers. So fewer but larger buyers. Its derived demand essentially comes from business demand is based on what consumer demand is. So if consumers are no longer looking for skinny jeans, then there's not going to be as much demand for skinny jeans for resellers. Also, this idea of elasticity and fluctuating demand. Elasticity, you'll talk about in economics class. Elasticity is this idea that, is there any change in demand based on a change in price? So for some businesses, gas, for example, even though the price of gas has gone up, the demand for it has not gone down at all. So marketers want to be concerned about that, changes and fluctuations in pricing. All right. Again, this is sort of just reiterating what we were talking about before. There's more complex decision making, larger sums of money, There's lots of different people in the buying organization that participate in it, that kind of thing. And then finally, types of buying situations. There's a straight rebuy that people buy the same thing over and over again. Every 2 weeks they get the same supply of steel, or every 2 weeks they get the same supply of flour. Every 2 weeks they get the same supply of eggs and sugar to make their cakes. Modified rebuy is that maybe the quantity changes, or they renegotiate the prices, or they might get new suppliers. A new task is a completely new product, someone buying it for the first time. And then system selling is sort of like a package deal. This idea that computers to a certain extent can be systems selling. If you're trying systems selling, if you're trying to come up with some sort of customer relationship management program, that could be systems selling. Okay, that's it on chapter 5. So we're now at the end of the first section of the course, and your test is going to be soon. I will post that on Facebook. Be sure, or I'm sorry, Facebook. Listen to me. I'll post it on Blackboard. You'll know the details of it. You'll have a few days to finish the test. If you have any questions about any of these things, please feel free to contact me via phone or email. You have that information on your syllabus. And that's that. Good luck, and we'll see you after the test, and we'll move into chapter 6 when we start focusing on the 4 P's of marketing. Thanks.